I'm assuming a lot of women, fortunate or unfortunate, have actually had people in my life who I've known in the past
Hmm.
who've gone through a similar experience, probably abuse in their childhood.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this in detail, but I could actually see how that experience or trauma shaped them or helped them in being what they are. And much of it is actually relatable when you know about them, then you can say, oh, that's why this person, he or she, acts in a certain way
Hmm.
or makes decision in a certain way. And one of them is validation.
Yeah.
I think you were seeking validation for yourself, and you were finding that in a partner,
Hmm.
because as you said, when you were growing up, you probably could not get that from your family or from anyone who's close to you as a relative,
Yeah.
and hence you were looking that outside, and that turned out to be not as pleasant as you
Yeah.
said, right? So for women who probably have a similar experience than like you, and they're probably young, what would you like to tell them? Like what message would you like to give to those women who probably are not as smart as you, or probably didn't would not be able to realize it as soon as you did at an
Hmm.
early age, and then probably go through a lot of more traumas. So how do you think these women should be handling such a situation or people like that in their life?
I mean, it's something that I'm still constantly always reminding myself of.
Okay.
And it's just to always, I mean, people say a lot, but it is to be true to yourself. Never, sacrificing your boundaries or your morals or your expectations, because once you start um slacking on those a little bit, people tend to really exploit that and take advantage of it. And then you kind of get comfortable with it as well. Um,
With the abuse and or with the
just with any type of exploitation, whether it be a boyfriend telling you you're not good enough, you're fat, you're this, you need to change that, or also repeating patterns of abuse. As someone who grew up in an abusive household, it kind of primes you to take lesser forms of abuse as okay, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
No, that does, yes, and I can probably already imagine what that means to you, and
Yeah.
probably how it looked like back in the day when you were young. So, how did you get out of that relationship, or what made you think that I'm no longer going to take this, and I want to do something better for myself, or I want to work on myself for that matter? And
Honestly, it wasn't me. Um, he booked a trip to Brazil with his family.
mhm,
I was originally supposed to go with him,
okay,
but his mother didn't like me at all because well, turns out I am Portuguese, I found out. But at the
okay,
time, I wasn't, as far as we all knew, I wasn't Portuguese, I wasn't Brazilian.
okay,
And for her, that was not okay. She
okay,
wanted her son to be with a woman who was Portuguese or at least Brazilian.
okay.
So she was also a huge critic of mine, telling me I should shave off my eyebrows and get them tattooed on thinner because they're really unprofessional being bigger.
Sorry, and this was how long ago? Same
The,
time when
yeah,
you were
this was throughout college. I was with this boyfriend through most of well, a big chunk of my college
okay.
experience. Um, and I put up with things like him asking for an open relationship, him having a very close female friend that he traveled way too far to go see all the time.
Really?
Just all these things that registered as weird to me, but I put them aside and I dealt with them because I felt like, well, no one's gonna love me like he loves me. And then one day he went to Brazil, and communication kind of went quiet.
Okay.
And then, it was just supposed to be him, his mom, and his sister. And they already don't like me. They hate me. They want him to be with someone else. So it was already making me feel a little weird that they were going for so long and
Mhm.
he's with these people. Um, and then I found out that instead of staying at the hotel, he was staying at hostels, and hostels are often co-ed. And then when he came home, something just didn't feel right. It felt weird. He felt distant. And then I found out that I still don't know what exactly happened, but something happened in that hostel that he was at after, days and days and days of him telling me nothing happened. Why don't you trust me? Like, you're so
Mhm.
insecure, you're so
Mhm.
controlling.
So
But
this
then
was
it
like
comes
more
out.
blaming onto you,
Yes.
playing the victim and trying to.
Yes.
Okay.
Making me seem like I'm crazy and I have
Mhm.
issues. And then a little while after it came out that he did fess up. So he actually ended up ending the relationship when he told me that.
Okay.
So after that is when I started realizing, like, I put so much into this person,
Mhm.
and once you leave a relationship like that, you start to reflect on it and you start to realize, like, how you really internalized everything. And all of my boundaries that normally I wouldn't be okay with or that would feel weird to me, I kind of overlooked them or pushed them aside. And that's why I always say, like, one piece of advice would be never sacrifice your boundaries or what you deem as acceptable, because once you do it, it turns into a slippery slope where you start accepting everything
True.
that's beneath you, and then it can open a pattern of abuse or a pattern of, maybe not abuse, but you know, like what I was saying, gaslighting,
Mhm.
making you the bad person and they're the victim when actually they
They're the
they
one.
are.
Yeah.
So that's something that I always emphasize to myself currently and to other people, is always respect your own boundaries. It's like I saw Camila Cabello was on TikTok the other day talking about how often it looks like self-discipline. Self-respect and self-worth often looks like self-discipline, of respecting your boundaries and making sure you do things even when you don't necessarily want to, because maybe you really you love this guy and you want to be with him, or you don't feel like going to the gym even though you're trying to be healthier. All these things ends up actually being self-discipline.
Mhm.
And I heard that and I was like, that is an amazing way to look at it. So that's how I look at it. I'm like, self-discipline is the most important thing that you can have in all aspects of your life, but especially your social and your family,
Mhm.
because they're the ones who tend to overstep it.
True. True. One more point which I thought I'd probably cover in the later part of our podcast, but since you've mentioned it quite a few times now, would you be comfortable in sharing how your childhood was and what kind of abuse you being, because I take you, again, let me first give our viewer my notion as to why I'm going to ask this question, just so that um they have it clear that I'm not trying to exploit your life. I'm just generally interested in understanding and knowing, as an outsider, when we look at the Western country,
Mhm.
we generally have a notion that people, probably at least of that country, like you yourself, you're white, you're from this country, you're born and brought up in this country. Racism is something probably people like you don't face,
Mhm.
because and as we grow up, the type of racism we hear about mostly are either towards the black community,
Yeah.
or towards probably the immigrants,
Mhm.
or someone, again, if we're looking at gender, yes, we've seen a lot of abuse done to women over the course of history.
Yeah.
We've seen that. But again, living in this age and time, you do not expect someone to be harsh towards children, or for that matter, a person of your color, and being born and brought up in this country. So, can you share something if you're comfortable about your childhood?
Yeah, totally. I'm always very open about my childhood
Mhm.
because it's a big part of what made me who I am today. And as I said, when I was going to Seneca, I
Please
had
feel free to have your coffee at
yeah,
the same time.
okay. Yeah, when I went to Seneca, I had a group for women who experienced what I did because I was alone through it all. And it was a really hard process that, again, it did mature me really quickly, but I missed out on having a childhood because I was dealing with all these things myself. So, yes, I love talking about it. So, um, I grew up in Scarborough,
Mhm.
like in an area called Danzig. So a lot of
Okay.
people who are from Scarborough know it's not a good area.
Okay.
Very sketchy area, lots of crime, very low
Even
income.
nowadays, I mean, if you hear about Scarborough, most of the crimes that you see are unfortunately coming from that place. I've
Mhm.
I've been in this country for only 4 years. I've had no chance to live in that place yet. However, I've moved around downtown Toronto a lot,
Mhm.
and I've been to places in Mississauga, Brampton, Tobico. But Scarborough is something, when something goes wrong, and especially when you have Six Buzz and these
Yes.
other social media that post stuff, it's either coming from Scarborough or
Or
Brampton,
Brampton, yes.
right?
Yes, those
S-
are the big 2.
Yeah. So in your time, Scarborough was probably when you were growing up. something that was in that zone already, like in
It
terms
was
of
already
crime?
in that zone, but it was more pocketed. So I lived in a
Sorry,
pocket.
what's that word?
Pocketed?
Yeah.
Like it was more in like pockets.
Oh,
Like it
okay.
wasn't all of Scarborough, it was more in pockets, whereas those pockets have kind of expanded a little bit more.
Okay. So there were like small areas probably where
Yes.
these would take place, and you were living in one of those.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, so I grew up in one of those areas with my grandparents. My grandparents
Okay.
raised me because my mom was 16, my dad was 18. So they
Okay.
were really young. Um and my grandmother fought for custody for me because my mother had she just wasn't she was young. She abandoned me when I was 3 days old.
Mhm.
And it just seemed like she wouldn't be a good parent. Like
And this was your paternal grandmother, or?
yes,
Okay.
yes, my paternal. So it was my dad's mother.
Okay.
Um And, life was good and it was both. It was good, it was bad. My grandmother herself, is definitely a victim of abuse and internalize those things as the older generation tend to internalize those more and start creating that almost as a standard for women. Like, "Oh, you just deal with this. Like, that's just how it is. That's just how men are. So you have to be okay with it." So I was already kind of in that environment. My grandfather was an alcoholic who would just drink all the time, throw bottles at my grandmother, get upset with me, yell at me.
You would witness all this.
Oh, all the time.
Okay.
Like, all I witnessed in my life was abuse or I experienced abuse. But throughout it all, my grandmother put me into dance when I was 3 years old to try to keep me away from my father because of how abusive he was. Because he would just get high all the time, like meth, crack, anything you could think of. He would just always be like he would have, a cut off Coke can smoking crack in the living room, and my grandmother wanted to get me away from that, but at the same time, she's the person who enabled him.
Mhm.
So, one thing you'll notice as I talk is me and my grandmother have a really interesting relationship, how I feel towards her, because she was my everything. She was my mother, she was my safe place, but she was also who put me in harm's way and who also turned her back on me at one of the moments in my life that I needed it most. Um, but yeah, so grew up my dad worked for a carnival most of the time.
Okay.
So when he was away, it was good because it was me and my grandma and my grandpa was still an alcoholic, but a lot of times he was actually in the hospital because he kept having strokes. So I'd live in the hospital basically because we would just go see him all the time. So my days would be go to school, go to the hospital for a few hours, then go to dance, and then by the time I come home, it's 11 o'clock at night.
Mhm.
So for me, growing up, school was not really a thing I took seriously. Um, my grandmother always told me, you're just gonna marry a rich man and you're never gonna work a day in your life. But for me, I always wanted to work. I always wanted to be independent because we had no money. And I
Mhm.
was like, why would I want this for myself? Like, I want more than that. But I was never, ever allowed to work when I was living with her. Um, and again, it was also just me wanting to somehow get away from home
Mhm.
because she would keep letting my dad back in, even though, I'd watch my dad drag her down the stairs by her hair, throw her into
Your
walls.
grandmother.
Yeah, his mother.
Oh.
He was so abusive to her and me, but every time he would get arrested, she would bail him out and bring him
Mhm.
back home. So it was a very double edged where this woman is my security.
At the same time, it's just probably not the safest place for you, right?
No, and it wasn't. And one thing I'll say is I never had friends in school ever. Everyone bullied me, picked on me.
Why do
But
you think that happened though? Like.
so what happened to me was I went to a private school. I went to a Montessori school for kindergarten to grade 4.
Mhm.
So my grandmother, she would just work in the childcare at the Montessori so that I could go to the Montessori because otherwise we couldn't afford it. Um, but then she wouldn't be working there anymore starting when I was going to grade 5. So I had to go to a public school. So I was entering into a public school in grade 5 in Guildwood, which is a very rich white community,
Mhm.
where everyone's parents were already friends. So all the kids have been friends since they were in diapers, and very rich. And again, I was from the wrong side of the tracks because there was literally a train track that divided Guildwood from Scarborough.
Okay. Okay.
So I was the trash from the other side of the tracks.
Okay.
So that already didn't help me. I was coming to a school where everyone was already clicked up since they were kids. I came from the wrong side of the tracks. And at that time, it wasn't cool to be a tomboy. So I came to school with my skateboard, my hair in a like tucked up in a ponytail with a hat, wearing like a full Puma fit. Like
Mhm.
I came with my Game Boy DS,
Okay.
and all that did was put a target on my back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were targeted mainly because of your lifestyle or how you looked, or maybe how just you presented yourself
It
to
was
the world?
everything. It was being a tomboy. It was people said I always looked like a boy because I have the fuller eyebrows.
Okay.
And the girls were starting to wear makeup back then in grade
Oh.
5, whereas I didn't really. I mean, I do the heavy black eyeliner like Avril Lavigne, who was like my idol.
Okay.
But again, she was that tomboy too, but it wasn't fully cool at that point. So
Because usually, like I can tell you from my perspective, that when you see women who's probably more tomboyish or have the interest that you had back then, you're usually scared of those women, no? Because as a woman, you and this is again a perception or something that I also can relate to when I was growing up. I did have female friends who were not really feminine back then
mhm,
in their interest. They would play video games, they would skateboard,
yeah.
and they would be a little, strong. And they did face bully. I actually am still friends with one of them on Facebook for a very long time. We don't talk as much, but she's just a friend because I grew up in Philippines,
Okay,
and
yeah.
she was there, and being a tomboy, she would hang out with us, the boys.
Mhm.
And I'll be very honest with you, because we were kids back then, I would never even treat her as a woman. If I would want something, or if I would like to communicate something, I would literally just put my hand on her shoulder and talk to her. You did this, you did that, and she would do the same. So there was not usually with women you would be like, hey, you'd not probably be as
Yeah.
boyish with them. So with her, I don't know, it was probably how she carried herself. She had very short hair, but the rest of the women were afraid of her because she would be very she would be into sports, she'd be aggressive.
Yeah.
So my notion is completely different, that why would people bully you if they actually perceive you as someone who has more manly characteristics, if I have to put it. And shouldn't they be afraid of you, or
Well, no, because also I was very timid and I was shy because of everything
okay.
going on at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was already like, I'd always be down like this, like keeping everything being in on
Okay.
myself. And I was always bullied for how tall I was, so I'd always be like slouched around, like trying to appear shorter. Um,
I mean, I wouldn't bully you, but you definitely are tall. Okay, you're taller than me,
yeah,
and you said your height is
I'm 5'10".
5'10", right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't look anywhere close to 5'8", 5'9". Yeah, you're 5'10", and I think that's actually an advantage for a woman, right? If especially
Well, for modeling, 5'9" is the minimum height requirement.
okay,
Well, it used to be. Nowadays, depending on where you are, if you're in Toronto, not as much because again, we're more diverse and there's a lot of other races that are shorter.
okay,
So it's kind of opening up a bit. Or actually in Dubai, they just banned models over 175
centimeters.
centimeters.
Okay,
So the world's changing. But previously it was a plus for me to be this tall.
but in school it was not
In
great for you.
school it wasn't. And again, like what you're saying about hanging with the boys, when I was in private school, that was me. All my friends were boys. I loved
Okay,
the boys because we all liked the same things. I never related to girls that much.
okay,
Even when I was in dance, I spent most like 5, 6 days a week at dance, but none of them were ever my friends because I couldn't relate to the cattiness,
okay.
the drama, the talking about each other and
Mhm.
criticizing each other's looks. Like that was just never me. So I never so at dance didn't have any friends really, never got along with the girls.
Okay.
At school, the boys were different there. Um, they were just so girl orientated. So if the girls didn't like me, the boys didn't like me.
Oh, okay.
So the girls bullied me and the boys followed along. But the boys wouldn't even know what it was about half the time. They would just be doing whatever the girls are doing. And then in my personal life, I lived again like in a low income, predominantly black area.
Okay.
And that didn't work out for me either because, being a white person in a predominantly black area, I wasn't very liked. And,
Okay.
I received threats. I had this one girl who said that if she ever saw me, she was going to cut me. because a boy she liked was talking to me.
Okay.
And she was like, what words can we say here?
You can say anything.
Okay.
Anything.
She was
Anything.
like, you white bitches coming in
Mhm.
and like the guys always like you. And I'm like, well, I don't want your guy. I don't like him. I'm just, I'm just living
Yeah.
here. And then it started becoming this thing where, being one of the only white people in a predominantly black area, people just didn't like me because of everything that was going on, thinking, oh, you're the person who put us here. Essentially seeing a white person and being like, what you embody.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, I'm here with you.
Correct. Yeah.
We're all going to the same food banks. We're all under the same system. We're all collecting the same welfare. We're all in this together,
Mhm.
Like if I put you here, I wouldn't be here with you.
Mhm.
Which is funny because that's actually something Theo Vaughn, I don't know if you know Theo Vaughn.
No.
So he's a comedian and podcaster.
Okay.
But he grew up in the South and he had the same experience where he was experiencing racism for being white. And
Is he also Canadian? Sorry.
no, he's American.
Okay.
But he also said, he's like, if I put you guys here in the ghetto, do you think I'd hang out here with you guys and live here with you? And I was like, that's perfectly how I would describe it.
Okay.
Because it's totally justified for them to feel that way, but it's misplaced.
Yeah.
Because we're all here together. We're all
You're
facing the
not
same
coming from
struggle.
outside, right?
No.
If you were, and you were probably getting off on your, luxury car,
Yeah.
and having your expensive handbag, sure,
Yeah.
they can probably have that grudge towards you, but again, still not justified. But again, I could understand probably where that is gonna come from or coming from. But you were living in the same community,
Exactly.
same environment, going to the same school as they were.
Yep. It's
And
preconceived notions, basically, is what it is.
wow, so that is really hard if you are to think like that. So how did you handle that?
So as you can see, I didn't really have any friends except for I had this one friend and he's still my best friend.
Okay.
I don't see him as much as I'd like to because he lives downtown and he's a social butterfly.
Okay.
And I'm busy too. And unfortunately, last we spoke, he's moving to Mexico in October, so we'll see. But my best friend Matthew, he was my rock. He was my everything back then. Because I couldn't really have many friends because my grandmother didn't want people to know what was going on in my life.
Mhm.
The abuse, the sexual abuse, all those things, because she said, well, children's aid will take you away from me and people will bully you. And I hate that she was right about the second part. Like, she was right, but it was hard for me because I was going through all these things that I knew weren't right, but it was just, as a kid, you can't get away from it because I didn't want to be away from her either because, like I said, she was my everything.
Mhm.
So Matthew was one of my friends who I confided in, and he was always there for me, and he became more like a brother. He would come to my house. If my grandmother was being, a little nasty to me, he would defend me. He was always there for me, and my grandmother didn't like that. So she's like,
Oh,
get that faggot out of my house because
okay.
she's older, so she doesn't like gay people.
Okay.
But he always fought to still be with me. And he was my lifeline because it was someone in my life who knew what was going on with me
Mhm.
and someone who fought for me when no one else did.